All right, so let's discuss behaviors that contribute to health. First off, attitudes. Attitudes are a type of behavior, right? If our attitudes are related to our behaviors, right? So our attitudes oftentimes are shaped by immediate situational influences. You know that. We've talked about this before. So here we have, a drinking game going on. And, college students in particular are really prone to overindulging when they do drink. There was a survey conducted by Harvard University probably 10 years ago now, and they found that the average college student reported having had at least one binge drink in the past academic year. It's just, and very unlikely for an adult to say that they had a binge drink. Immediate situational influences, what is everybody else doing? In this particular case, these kinds of binge drinkings, you got to remember that the consequences at the moment seem pretty remote. The long-term impacts of over drinking are not on the top of these people's mind. They look like they're about to have some kind of race of some sort. I don't know what they're doing. But you're thinking about what's going on right now and what everybody else is doing right now, and not really worried about, is this going to ultimately hurt my liver? And, in 40 years, I'm going to be sorry I did this, right? People aren't usually thinking like that. Other situational influences, they found that, what families do they all tend to do the same thing. It sort of normalizes the behavior. This is a picture of a family from a BBC show where they're all going to try and lose weight together. And they probably all gained weight together because of their eating habits and sort of what's normal in that family and what they all are doing at the same, like maybe their family surrounds, a lot of their family rituals are around the dinner table or around eating or something. And so, for them all to have gained weight, that's not very surprising. And then for them to be successful losing weight together, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because now the situational influence may shift and they're all sort of on the same page and they're working together. We tend to see that couples will do a better job of losing weight if they're working on it together than if one of them tries to do it and the other one is still doing their normal eating habits. So the situational influence, if all your friends are doing Tai Chi or yoga or whatever, you may do it with them because everybody else is doing it. And so, it's a way to bond. It's something to do. If all your friends are going to the gym, then, you all go to the gym and you meet up there. And now something I said in the last video about a lot of times when we do stuff that's virtuous, we may follow it up with stuff that's not virtuous. So maybe we all go to the gym and then we stop and get a donut and coffee on the way home or something. But the idea that, if the situation is encouraging healthy behavior, we tend to go with the situation and we do healthy behavior. If the situation is encouraging unhealthy behavior, we may go that way as well. They find that a lot of times in couples, if one of the partners is smoking, it makes it harder for the other one to quit smoking. They oftentimes will go back to smoking. So, what's going on in the situation really has a big influence on our healthy behaviors. Then there are the larger situation, right? The cultural influences. And so we see some patterns that are different between collectivistic and individualistic cultures. Collectivistic cultures, we tend to see lower rates of depression and we tend to see lower rates of alcoholism. It's really notable that there are lower rates of depression in collectivistic cultures because there are higher rates of a genetic marker that makes people prone to depression in people who tend to live in collectivistic cultures. It's really interesting because when those people move out of a collectivistic culture and come to the US carrying that marker for depression, they're much more likely to experience depression when they get here. And one of the hypotheses is that this genetic marker for depression may actually encourage a collectivistic orientation. And when you find yourself in an individualistic one, it's not helping you to cope with these depressive tendencies the way that a collectivistic situation would. And so the person actually manifests symptoms of depression when they don't have their support system in the collectivistic situation. So that's kind of an interesting twist on why, maybe it's not just purely that the culture is supportive naturally and it's not, not reacting to people's natural tendencies. The other thing about collectivistic cultures displaying less depression, one interpretation is that while they may have depressive symptoms in a collectivistic culture, it would be disruptive to the group for a person to express their depressive symptoms. And so it may just be part of the culture to sort of soldier on, even though you're feeling depressed, even though you're having symptoms. And so in collectivistic culture, basically what we're seeing is fewer of those symptoms or behaviors that would indicate that the person is sort of focusing in on themselves, right? Feeling depressed, drinking to excess, those kinds of things. Individualistic culture, we tend to see more adherence by members of the community to exercise routines and to non-smoking routines. And in individualistic culture, you see a lot of people saying, well, I'm working out so I can be healthy, not because, it's good for the group or that my family, will benefit from this or anything like that, but more that I'm trying to be my best self. I want to be healthy, the typical individualistic explanations for why they would be more adherent. In poorer societies, we tend to see lower levels of heart disease than we do in richer societies. There are a couple of ways of looking at that. One is that in poorer societies, the kinds of fats, the saturated fats that tend to contribute to cardiovascular disease are more expensive and so therefore less available. The ability to, ride in a car to get where you're going is lower. So you're probably going to be riding a bike or walking to get where you're going, which is good for your cardiovascular system. So it could be that just sort of how the culture is set up favors healthier hearts. But then there's a darker interpretation, which is that people may be unknowingly dying of cardiovascular disease at younger ages, because in poorer societies, we have lower age at death, right? Lower average age at death. So people might be just dying before the cardiovascular disease really manifests itself. It's typically diagnosed here in the US, in the 60s or 70s, people will start to display that they've got cardiovascular disease. And so if you have a much younger, lifespan in a poorer society, they just may never get to the age where they would start to display this disease of older age. So there's sort of the positive interpretation, and there's sort of the little bit darker interpretation. So one of the factors that can really undermine our health is experiencing stress. So the term stress refers to our negative emotional response to a stressor. A stressor is something that's out in the environment that is triggering a stress response in us. So some examples of things that can be stressors would be things like life-changing events. I've got a nice picture of a baby being born, because while this could be, for most people a happy event, even if it's a happy event, it can be stressful, because anytime our life substantially changes, there's an adjustment period, there's the unknown, there's all this stuff going on that makes it stressful. So it could be the birth of a baby that's a life-changing event. It could be, graduating from high school. It could be, or college. It could be getting your first real career job, like your life, moving out of your parents' house. These can be things that are really happy and really, you look forward to events, but they are stressful. Or it could be negative life-changing events, right? Things that, like getting an injury that's going to now for the rest of your life be part of your life. That's a life-changing event that's not happy, right? And so that can be stressful. So anything that's a life changer. Catastrophes, a giant earthquake, a tsunami, a wildfire that blows through your entire region and, burns down your town, or something like that. These major catastrophes. Catastrophes are usually defined as things that, big, enormous things that affect a bunch of people. It's not something idiosyncratic to you. It's not something that just happened to you and your family. This is something big where like everybody in the town or the region are all being affected by it. Daily hassles. Well, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with what a daily hassle is. I got this picture from a traffic jam in India. This kind of thing, hopefully you've never sat in a traffic jam in the US that looks like that, because that's a lot of rows of cars. It's kind of hard to count them up because they're narrowing down but we get in traffic jams. We have these kinds of daily hassles where we have to go stand in line, or we have to, keep track of something and then go deliver it somewhere, and there's time pressure to it. And it's just like it's just this hassle. It's not a life-changing event. It's not a catastrophe. It's just, it's a lot. And so these daily hassles. Interestingly, the catastrophes, oftentimes, while they are very stressful, don't get me wrong, because there's so much support for people who have experienced catastrophes, like Red Cross comes in and they have like a whole system for helping people through. And, maybe your family comes in and helps because you're in that catastrophe zone and they don't live there. And maybe they're like, here, you can come live with us until things straighten out. Or, there's oftentimes a lot of help offered for catastrophes. There's oftentimes help temporarily provided, at least idiosyncratically, when you experience a life-changing event, right? Like when you move out of your parents' house, a lot of times there'll be a housewarming party and people give you stuff that you need to start your new life in this new place. And so it eases your transition a little bit, or, these kinds of things. Like there's a little bit of support for life-changing events and catastrophes. Where there isn't support oftentimes is daily hassles. These are just little things that grate on us and that accumulate across the days and the weeks. And it's just like one thing after another. So a lot of times people find that the things that affect them the most are actually the daily hassles. That's the thing that like long-term causes them to have like slightly elevated heart rate or other things that can then trigger stress-related illnesses. So speaking of affecting health, so when you have persistent stressors like daily hassles or, a life-changing event that keeps going or a catastrophe that, it just keeps going. So you've got these persistent stressors and stress responses, the negative emotions that are being triggered by those persistent stressors. Those can oftentimes lead us to engage in unhealthy behaviors, right? Sometimes people take up smoking or they take up drinking or they aren't eating well or they're not getting good sleep because of the stress that they're under, right? So a lot of times the health effects stem from, taking on these negative unhealthy behaviors. But there's also another pathway where stress can affect health. Because our body has a response that allows us to cope with stress by releasing stress hormones. They're called cortisol. That release of stress hormones has a cascading effect on our body. So when the cortisol is secreted, it causes our heart rate to go up and our immune system to sort of be less active because we're dealing with what's going on right now, not what might happen to us in 2 weeks after an exposure to a virus or something. And the autonomic nervous system becomes activated. So you might get headaches or you might get stomach aches or other kinds of things. So the release of these stress hormones can lead to the long-term health effects if you are under persistent stress. So here's an interesting question. Do males and females respond to stress in the same way? Well, the classic model for how humans respond, or even, other animals respond to stress, is Selye's fight or flight model. In this model, when a stressor occurs, our brain says, stressor, I've got to be able to fight, or I've got to be able to flee from it. And so it activates your sympathetic nervous system. I always remember the sympathetic nervous system as it feeling sympathy for us because we're scared or we're angry. So it activates your heart to beat faster, for your arteries to widen so that blood can pump to all your muscles. Your lungs are going to be breathing a lot more quickly. Your adrenal glands are going to secrete a bunch of adrenaline, so you'll have extra power and endurance. Your stomach's going to stop digesting food because we don't need that. Instead, we're going to release a bunch of glucose that's been stored in our liver, so that you have a lot of energy to run or to fight. So all of this stuff gets you ready for a fight or a flight. According to Selye, you can cope with an acute stressor for about 20 minutes, and then you reach exhaustion. And then you either are going to get eaten or, lose the fight or whatever it is. And then your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and reverses all of these effects. So if you have this nice acute stress experience where you had to run from something or fight with something or whatever, your brain is designed to trigger that parasympathetic nervous system to kick in and reverse all the effects so that now your heart rate goes down, your arteries start to constrict so you stop pumping so much blood, your lungs slow down, your adrenal glands stop secreting adrenaline, like everything returns back to normal, right? The problem with us humans is that a lot of times, like I said, our stressors are daily hassles, right? So it's like this chronic low level of stress. And so if Selye's model is correct, we have our sympathetic nervous system get activated because we're on, we're irritated because we didn't get our parking spot. And then, oh no, another hit when, we're late to class. And then another, like these little bitty things accumulate, but they never are enough to kick in the parasympathetic nervous system. And so for this model, the explanation for why we get sick is because we have this chronic elevation of our heart rate that can contribute to cardiovascular disease, or we have this chronic interference with our digestive process, so we may develop acid reflux, or we have this chronic shutting down of the stomach while we're secreting out a bunch of glucose, which then can affect the pancreas, and we can develop type 2 diabetes. These stress-related health issues are tied back to the fact that we're experiencing chronic sympathetic nervous system activity without the balanced parasympathetic. So I'm just going to end this little recording and come back with one tip. If you want to avoid that problem, you want to convince your body at least once a day that it's actually had a fight or a flight. So Selye said we have about a 20-minute period of being able to be stressed, and then we'll reach exhaustion and the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. So like a 20-minute exercise routine convinces the body that you've had that fight or flight, so that then the parasympathetic nervous system can kick in and do its job to return us back to a resting state. So tip for the day, do at least 20 minutes of exercise in a day. And it doesn't have to be super hot and sweaty. It just needs to elevate your heart rate, get your muscles moving, and you will get the benefits from that as far as, interfering with these stress-related health issues. All right, we will come back in the next video and we'll talk about, well, what about females? What is there a male-female difference? So we'll talk about that.